I'll admit I was wrong about modern Star Trek's riskiest TV show. I will admit that Star Trek Lower Decks seemed like a wild idea when it was announced, but despite my initial apprehension, I'm so happy to have been quickly proven wrong about a Star Trek comedy show being a bad idea. Of all the Star Trek TV shows, it stands out for its fearless approach to adding to the franchise's dense canon while constantly tapping on the fourth wall. I can comfortably understand why some Trekkies may not enjoy Star Trek Lower Decks, but I am definitely not on their side and haven't been for a long time. The epic Star Trek timeline has been enhanced further by modern efforts. After the divisive ending of Star Trek Enterprise in 2005, the Prime Universe wasn't visited again until the arrival of Star Trek Discovery 12 years later. When the saga returned, it had, perhaps unsurprisingly, undergone the gritty reboot treatment. I wasn't sure at first, and while it's still not my favorite Star Trek show, I've warmed to it a little and have at least accepted that it paved the way for the space opera's comeback. However, Star Trek Lower Decks had a very different role to play. Why I was skeptical about an animated Star Trek comedy when it was first announced. Although Star Trek, the animated series, had been canonized long before Star Trek Lower Decks' announcement, I had never really seen the franchise as anything other than a live-action project. That being said, the thought of another animated Star Trek show still excited me. What caught me off guard was the reveal that Star Trek Lower Decks would be making comedy a priority. I had certainly laughed at certain moments in Star Trek movies and TV shows before, but none of those projects had set out to be anything other than epic sci-fi adventures. The show's zany animation style and offbeat humor initially brought to mind shows like Rick and Morty and Final Space. It felt as though after Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard weren't quite hitting the mark quite how the franchise had expected. Star Trek was selling out in a desperate attempt to attract a new kind of fan base. Thankfully, I went into it with an open mind, and all my worst fears were immediately put to rest, and some of them were even harnessed to great effect. Once I got past the weird fact that everything being said and done in Star Trek Lower Decks was being entered in a franchise canon, I realized the show was exactly what the iconic saga needed. Not only was the story set in the long-neglected 24th century, but it was clear it was written as a love letter to the franchise's golden era. The endless string of references and Easter eggs concerning other Star Trek projects established it as a show that was for seasoned Trekkies rather than newcomers. Despite Lower Decks' continuous nods to classic Star Trek episodes, it does also work as a self-contained narrative. The new characters are often very easy to root for, and the creative adventures on which they embark routinely achieve far more in the show's 20-minute sitcom format than other Star Trek spin-offs achieve in an hour or more. The chaotically fast pacing has a huge number of advantages, and I've already noticed loads of new things when rewatching the show that I missed the first time around. Although I'm devastated that Star Trek Lower Decks is now over after its fifth and final season, I'm also really glad that it happened at all. It gave the franchise a much-needed nudge away from the dark and dreary formula that was being favored by shows like Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. While those two shows certainly have their merits, Star Trek Lower Decks serves as a constant reminder that the franchise can always try something new and work incredibly well. When Paramount first announced Star Trek Lower Decks, I was among the skeptics. An animated comedy set in the Star Trek universe? The very idea felt like a risky departure from the franchise's legacy of bold space exploration, deep philosophical quandaries, and high-stakes drama. Would it reduce Star Trek to a series of cheap jokes and irreverence, stripping it of the grand storytelling that made it iconic? I wasn't alone in my apprehension. Many longtime Trek fans, particularly those raised on the cerebral narratives of The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or even the adventurous optimism of Voyager, worried that Lower Decks would be an outright parody. We feared it would lean too heavily into broad humor, failing to respect the heart of the franchise. But now, after several seasons of Lower Decks, I can confidently admit I was wrong. The heart of Star Trek in a new form. One of my biggest misconceptions was assuming that comedy and Star Trek couldn't mix without undercutting the franchise's legacy. I'd forgotten that Star Trek had always had a humorous side. The original series gave us playful moments between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. The Next Generation had holodeck hijinks and the awkward social attempts of Data. Even Deep Space Nine, one of the darkest entries in the franchise, embraced comedic relief through characters like Quark and Garak. Yet Lower Decks isn't just funny, it's deeply Star Trek. It's a love letter to the franchise, packed with references, callbacks, and genuine character-driven storytelling. The show's writers clearly revere the material, and instead of mocking Star Trek, they celebrate it through humor. At its core, Lower Decks captures something that's been part of Star Trek since the beginning: optimism. While Discovery and Picard have explored darker, serialized storytelling, Lower Decks retains the spirit of adventure and camaraderie that define classic Trek. Its characters, particularly Ensigns Boimler, Mariner, Tendi, and Rutherford, exemplify the best qualities of Starfleet officers, even when their antics go awry. Character-driven comedy, not just jokes. What truly won me over was Lower Decks' commitment to character-driven humor. The comedy isn't just random gags or slapstick, it arises from well-developed personalities. Mariner's rebellious nature, Boimler's obsessive rule-following, Tendi's boundless enthusiasm, and Rutherford's tech obsession aren't just played for laughs. They evolve over time, making these characters feel just as real and engaging as any live-action Trek crew. One of the show's biggest surprises is how much emotional depth it carries. Boimler's struggles with ambition, Mariner's complicated relationship with authority and her own potential, and Tendi's desire to prove herself. All of these arcs give the show a sincerity that makes its humor even more effective. Lower Decks isn't laughing at Star Trek, it's laughing with it, while still telling meaningful stories about friendship, growth, and what it means to be in Starfleet. A risk that paid off. In retrospect, Lower Decks was one of the riskiest endeavors in modern Star Trek. A comedic animated show could have gone horribly wrong, turning Star Trek into a farce, alienating longtime fans, or feeling disconnected from the franchise's core ideals. Instead, it has carved out its own unique place in the Trek universe. It has also paved the way for more diverse storytelling within the franchise. If Lower Decks can work, why not experiment further? Strange New Worlds has already blended episodic storytelling with humor and adventure, and the success of Lower Decks has likely encouraged Paramount to take more creative risks. I'll happily eat my words. So yes, I was wrong about Lower Decks. I assumed it would be a cheap attempt to cash in on Star Trek's legacy, an irreverent misstep in a beloved franchise. Instead, it has proven itself as a genuinely heartfelt, intelligent, and hilarious addition to Star Trek. It respects its source material, expands its universe, and most importantly, embraces the optimism and curiosity that define the best of Trek. If you, like me, dismissed Lower Decks early on, I urge you to give it another chance. Beneath the jokes and animated antics lies a series that truly understands what makes Star Trek special. And sometimes, admitting you were wrong feels pretty good, especially when the result is this much fun. I've crafted an engaging piece reflecting on how Lower Decks won over skeptics like myself. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks. Importantly, embraces the optimism and curiosity that define the best of Trek. If you, like me, dismissed Lower Decks early on, I urge you to give it another chance. Beneath the jokes and animated antics lies a series that truly understands what makes Star Trek special. And sometimes, admitting you were wrong feels pretty good, especially when the result is this much fun. I've crafted an engaging piece reflecting on how Lower Decks won over skeptics.